Good afternoon. What's up, everybody? My name is Tony Robles. Welcome to the People's Poet Podcast, also known as Triple P. This is a podcast that we just started a couple of weeks ago where we talk to people, and more people. Mostly people who are making positive impacts in the community. In upcoming shows, we're going to be speaking to authors, activists, and artists. Today, we have a very special guest who is in the world of politics. Brian Caskey is candidate for North Carolina Senator in District 48, which I believe is Buncombe, Henderson, and Transylvania counties.
Very good.
Brian, welcome to our show.
Thank you, Tony. I'm glad to be here.
Well, what I wanted to say was that, you know, being a poet and you being a politician or being in the political realm, people would think that, you know, that's the very antithesis of each other, you know, poets and politicians. So it's ironic that there's a poet that's, you know, interviewing a politician today. You know, this is a big race. We're living in a time right now where, you know, this election is extremely crucial. What I wanted to start off by asking you is, you know, a little bit about your background. I know that you a councilman from Mills River. That, and then why the big, you know, $100 question is why are you running?
Well, yeah, and it depends how far you want to go back. You know, in terms of, yes, I am on the the town council rather in Mills River, and I've been in that position for 3 years. Last December, my fellow council members, and I work with 4 Republicans, they elected me to serve as mayor pro tem. So I don't think that's happened anywhere else where 4 Republicans have elected a Democrat to serve at such a high level on the council. But I think it reflects a little bit of the heavy lifting that I do for the council. I'm on a lot of different committees, including a lot of the roadway committees. And of course, in this area, you tend to attract a lot of flack. You know, if you're anywhere near these decisions that are being made to widen roads and that sort of thing. But I'm going to surprise you and let you know that I know you're a poet and a very accomplished poet. And I have a very deep and abiding interest in poetry. Matter of fact, for my master's degree, I went to UNCW and I took a liberal studies course and I specialized in Southern poetry. So I'm actually armed with some poetry today, so we could take some turns reading some if you if we get to that point.
So you went to UNCW and you had an emphasis, or you took classes in poetry and I guess in literature. You know, one of the things that I really am learning, you know, having worked a little bit with the Carl Sandburg House, is that there is a richness of poetic history or poetic landscape, you know, in Western North Carolina, as well as in probably other parts of the state. Once I get a chance to, you know, take a trip and go farther. So you were, I guess, elected to Mills River Council in 2017.
Yes.
There are so many things right now going on in terms of politics and just the landscape. Can you talk a little bit about, you know, why this particular election is so crucial and why people really need to get out and vote?
Well, yeah, absolutely. You know, we keep hearing that it's the most important election of our lifetimes. And I really, you know, you hear that pretty often. I can remember hearing that back when Reagan was president. But we look now at how corrupt our political system has become, and we look how pervasive money has become in that political process. And I think a lot of that started with the Citizens United decision. But there's just unlimited money. Once you're in office, you basically have access to, if you are inclined that direction, to take pretty much unlimited amounts of money, and that keeps you in office. It also makes you beholden to the people who have been giving you money. You know, my grandmother used to say there's no free lunch, and it's one of the reasons I decided to run for state Senate is because as an elected official, I'm seeing a lot of this stuff, in our state level politics and in our national politics. The interesting thing is that ethics laws dictate that as a municipal representative, I'm not allowed to take a cup of coffee. If you and I were in a coffee shop talking right now, I could not let you buy my coffee. And if I have a meeting with a contractor or somebody comes out to town hall and they try to give me a t-shirt, I have to say no, because there's value attached to it. But you get to that state level, you get to that federal level especially, and it's really a rich man's game. And if we want to take our democracy back, it starts this year. We have to first of all vote every incumbent out as far as I'm concerned. We have to vote them out. We have to insist that our voices be heard, that we want purity in politics. And so that's really, it's the reason I'm running. It's the reason why I decided from the very first day, I'm not taking any corporate PAC money. And it's been offered and refused.
Yeah, there's an interesting landscape because we do have a Democratic governor, a Democrat, Roy Cooper, and then you have the assembly or the legislature that is majority Republican. Can you talk about, some of the, just about that landscape? Because I know that there's been the talk about extending Medicaid and things that the governor wants to do, but there's a there's gridlock in terms of
Sure.
that. So how, if elected, how will you go about dealing with other folks who are on the other side of the ideological fence?
Sure. I mean, and you can kind of speculate on what the landscape is going to look like after November. I happen to think that it's going to be very favorable for Democrats. I think we're going to take both houses. It may be by slim majorities, but I think after November, Democrats are going to be in control in the House and Senate. And I think that provides a lot of opportunities for some things that need to get done to help North Carolina families and North Carolina workers. I had a kickoff event last year at Bold Rock Cidery out here in Mills River, and we had a whole bunch of people come out for that. And my friend John Ager, who's currently a representative in the State House, he came out and he spoke, and he said, look, the North Carolina State Senate is a mafia organization. And just let that sink in for a second.
Right.
Because,
right?
right?
Yeah.
I mean, a mafia organization, and really it is. And you have people like my opponent, Chuck Edwards. He's known as a good soldier. He does what he's told to do. He gets his marching orders. Often the words that come out of his mouth or out of Jake Johnson's mouth, or you pick somebody, especially from Western North Carolina, because people tend to be appointed to positions. And again, we talked about favors, right? So now you owe somebody because they appointed you to a position that now they're giving you money to keep you in that position. So you owe them, right?
Yes.
But you can trace his words to press releases that come out of Phil Berger's office. Phil Berger being the leader of the Senate. So, I mean, I really think that the opportunity exists this fall to take back our state house and take back our Senate, because it is our Senate. And when John referred to the Senate as a mafia organization, I'll explain sort of what he was talking about. We had back in the spring, obviously, COVID-19 was becoming a thing and businesses were closing or putting themselves on hiatus, and my business certainly did that. And so there was a COVID Relief Act and some federal money that came down. And so at the legislature, they had to figure out how to spend that money. Well, so they came up with the COVID-19 Relief Act. And from what I've heard, what I've been told by Democrats, the funding portion was handled in the State House. The policy portion of it was handled in the Senate. It was put together with no Democratic input at all. So Democrats didn't even see this until the last second, which they're shown this bill and say, okay, this is what's in it. This is how we're going to spend the money. Now we're going to send it over to the House to figure out how to fund these programs. Well, when Democrats saw the bill, it was a 40-page bill. When it arrived in the State House, it was a 70-page bill. So what gets put in? I mean, the 40 pages Democrats had no input on, but then in the middle of the night, as this thing is going over to the State House, you have an additional 30 pages, and it's all pork and protections for big corporations and stuff that just absolutely didn't need to be in there.
So there were a lot of amendments that undermined the original intent.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And today, and I'm going wide on social media with this today, there is a story that's coming out about how this chicken magnate, if that's a thing, this guy who owns a bunch of poultry slaughterhouses in Arkansas, but also in North Carolina, his name is Ronald Cameron. He gave members of the legislature $5,000 checks, and he gave enough of them to where he spent almost $250,000 basically buying legislation from the North Carolina State Senate and State House, but also the Council of State. Yeah, it's sickening.
You
the
know,
amount of corruption.
You had mentioned mafia. I actually do a pretty good Brando. Well, what's in it for me? One of my favorite movies. You know, I mean, take it as you will. I mean, you know, since we're talking about the influence of big money, the figures that just came out right now. I guess over the past week we had 860,000 new unemployment claims last week alone, and then also I think we have 60 million who have filed for unemployment, new record for jobless claims, but yet the total net worth of the nation's billionaires has soared by about 850 billion since mid-March, since the kind of the beginning of the coronavirus, which is really telling. What I wanted to kind of ask you too is, I know that you have certain issues that are important to you, and maybe you can go down the list. We have environment, we have healthcare, we have public education, and we also have maybe we could start off with this one, actually, food insecurity, because
oh yeah,
1 in every 4 children I know in this area go hungry, and maybe we can go down the list of those issues. I know that one's something that's very important to you.
It's absolutely, it's one of the most shameful things about North Carolina right now is food insecurity. And my wife and I, we work on a food line. Once every couple months, we'll go out and we'll serve food. And the people coming through this food line, it's unbelievable. First of all, because you have basically 2 hours of people coming through this line, and it's people from all walks of life. And you've got young families, you've got elderly people, you have firemen, you have teachers, you have people from all walks of life, and it's just they're showing up on a Tuesday night because they happen to know that at this particular church they're serving a free dinner. And these are families that cannot make ends meet. They are working poor. And so food insecurity is a huge thing. Right now during the pandemic, we're still feeling the effects of that. And there are so many families that, let's say dad lost his job or mom lost her second job, or, it's really tough on people financially right now. And especially if you happen to live off the main thoroughfares just a bit, where let's say, maybe the school bus that takes you to school, I mean, the schools are doing everything they can to help out with children who are food insecure. The buses are delivering food items to their homes or delivering to certain pickup spots, but still it's hard on kids. And when I pull up to the high school, my daughter goes to West Henderson, and I pull up there in front and she's standing out there with 4 or 5 of her friends. I can't help but wonder, which kid is going to go home and not have enough on the table tonight.
Yeah.
And it's absolutely shameful. And there's so many things we could do to address that situation. And it really starts with making sure people have access to adequate healthcare. When a very large percentage of North Carolina families say that if they had a $500 medical bill, they would have to borrow the money, that they don't have it in the bank. They would have to find a way to pay for that. That tells you something. People are living on that knife's edge, and we can fix that. And there are some boring things that we could talk about, like the earned income tax credit. North Carolina was the only state in the union to kill the earned income tax credit, which is, it's essentially, it's a policy that if you're working and you work yourself out of poverty slightly, you get a tax break for doing that. For it's an incentive to work. It's a Reagan era conservative program that works because people have incentives to work more and work harder and earn more money. So it's a really good policy. But North Carolina, the General Assembly and all their infinite wisdom, decided they were going to shift the tax burden from the wealthy to the poor.
So it would have given a tax, it would have been given a tax break, and it would have given more money for people.
Absolutely, yeah.
More money.
Yeah, you would get to keep more of, right. You get to keep more of what you earn.
Yeah.
And you wouldn't have to pay taxes on so much of that money. So for people and families who are in that, $30,000 to $40,000 of income, in that range, not poor, but not necessarily middle class either, those are the people we're talking about. And so having that tax break there was very beneficial to so many young families and families that are on that line down there. And North Carolina is the only state in the union that chose to take that benefit away. And in large part, it was because they wanted to shift those tax breaks to large corporations.
I want to ask a couple of questions that were sent in by people that live in Hendersonville. There's one from, gosh, it's on my phone here. Let me get this. This question comes from Kathy. Let's see. And I think you already kind of touched on this. She says, one thing I'm always tempted to ask is how a candidate thinks they can work with the Republican Party, which is basically obstructionist, and how we as private citizens can deal with the vitriol. There's threats and insults, and, it just seems like a kind of a civil dialogue becomes more and more remote.
Yeah. And it's funny. I'm glad that question came up because there was a candidate forum last week. The Brevard, Transylvania Chamber hosted this, and it was a candidate forum. It involved everybody from school board candidates to county commission candidates to legislative candidates. So Sam Edney and I were on it, and Jake Johnson and my opponent, Chuck Edwards, was on it as well. And I was really surprised when my opponent, maybe I shouldn't say I'm surprised. I was just surprised that he voiced it this way. He said, there are things that Republicans and Democrats cannot even negotiate on. So there is, in a lot of people's mind, there's like a brick wall that, we can maybe look across it, but you're not going to come on my side and I'm not going to come on your side. I don't believe that for a second. I mean, my answer to the question was, I work with Republicans all the time, and I'm not going to surrender my core values. I'm not going to give up my personal beliefs on what's right and what's wrong. But there are points of negotiation where you can give a little bit. You can be flexible, and we've seen down through time in American politics. You've got politicians like Lyndon Johnson, who was a master at giving in a little bit to the other side because he had a big item that he wanted, right? So, and you have to be able to make certain trade-offs of things that don't impact your core values. So, in Mills River, sometimes it's we want to buy this brand of tractor, for cleaning up the park, and then sometimes it comes down to, all right, well, let's talk about dependent care benefits then.
It's kind of funny that you brought up LBJ because my late grandmother, great-grandmother, rest in peace, sometimes she would get names and acronyms wrong. And she would refer to him as MJB. which was the big coffee company. But we knew
Yeah.
what she was talking about. I think there was, let me see, there was one other question. This one is coming from, I think it's coming from Megan. This has to do with climate change, Brian. She says,
Yeah.
she asks, what policies would you set forth to combat climate change?
Well, one of the things we've done in Mills River is we've invested heavily in greenways and also in solar power. So if you drive out to Mills River's Town Park right now, you're going to see solar panels on every single town-owned building. And one of the things, and we talked about how do you work with Republicans, right? And I'm outnumbered on that town council 4-1, but I was able to make the argument, and they felt like it was a strong enough argument that it held weight. That look, we are in a position where we qualify for tax credits and rebates. So if we buy these panels and we have them installed, Duke Energy is going to send us money. And over the next, I think it's between 9 to 11 years, we will have those panels completely paid off. So at that point, you're basically generating electricity for free. The panels right now also are defraying our town's energy reliance by 77%. So
Wow.
as a totally separate thing, I have panels on my house. I used a different company. And I want to make sure there were no sweetheart deals anywhere. paid full freight. This was a company out of Charlotte, South Carolina, that I used to put panels on my own house. But I'm seeing the benefits there, and it's a very, very efficient, very clean way of capturing energy, and you are not generating any kind of you're not adding to the carbon footprint at all. Matter of fact, there's an app on my phone that shows me how much carbon I have not produced over the course of a month, or over the course of a year, over the course of a quarter, and how many trees that equates to, which it's really pretty cool. And so that's definitely one of the things that we want to do. But we're encouraging multimodal transportation, and the people here want it. We're working on a comprehensive land use plan right now, and one of the biggest things we're getting in terms of feedback from people is we want alternative ways of getting from point A to point B. We don't necessarily want to drive. We'd like to walk. We'd like to ride our bikes. This is a great area. The Mills River Valley is flat. There's mountains all around, but for the most part, if you want to ride from this point to that point. And so we're looking at connecting Sierra Nevada with Bold Rock and making that nice little loop through there with some multimodal paths. And I think that, back in 1973, North Carolina declared itself to be the Great Trails State. And we haven't seen it. It hasn't come to pass. And I think it's finally time that it comes to pass. We need to build enough trails to where we can look into the future and see a future that's not dominated by the automobile.
Yeah. One other question. I'm just going to kind of pull these at random.
Sure.
Michael from from Hendersonville asks what your thoughts are on student loan forgiveness and lowering the cost of college, higher education.
Yeah, one of the first things that I want to do is look into eliminating the cost of community college. And it's working well in the state of Tennessee. They decided, and Tennessee's a red state, right? Tennessee decided to make community college free. And so they're actively training high-tech workers for their workforce free of charge to the student. And that's something that North Carolina should be doing. We've got so much industry, and we've got great community colleges. There's no doubt about that. But you make community college free for the student, and you're not only training your workers for your own workforce, you're giving them multiple opportunities down the road. They may end up wanting to go to a 4-year university and take that even further. But investing in your students and your workers and your workforce is something that's really important to me. So student
Yeah.
loan forgiveness, that's a tougher sell for a lot of Republicans. It's a complete non-starter. So I think I would want to start with community college, make that free. You can make a really good argument for that. I had student loans. I know what a burden they are. It's a terrible thing to have to carry around with you. I think I paid mine off about 5 years ago, just to give you, point of reference. It's terrible. It's one of the things you just have to constantly be thinking about. It's an anchor around your neck. But if we start by making opportunities for community college, make that free of charge, you can have trained workers ready to enter the workforce from day one, ready to step into light industry and some of these high skilled technical jobs. And I think that's really important.
Yeah, I mean, I can attest to, community colleges. I've gone to a community college myself and was able to get some very practical training. Plus, the education, in community colleges is good. And you all, in fact, a good friend of mine took it was at City College of San Francisco. He took the radiology with the X-ray tech program,
Yeah.
and he's been staring at bones ever since, and that's been going on 25 years. So, I mean, he's not the only one. Hotel and restaurant. I know at Blue Ridge College, community college, they have a really good program with a lot of practical
Absolutely,
things.
absolutely. They just added a series of courses on brewing beer, and
Brewing,
that's because
right?
and we have
Right.
so many. And so you can see that as being something that people would be really interested in. My daughter went to AB Tech and got her CNA there, and she's now working as a nurse. I went and got a certificate in web design when I was still in the publishing world. I mean, community colleges are fantastic, and the rigor of the courses, people don't give community colleges enough credit. Um, they are tough. I mean, you get into that classroom and you better be able to pull your weight, because it is not a gimme at all.
You're absolutely right about that. I tell you, you know. Um, let's see. I know that we had a few things here. Brian, I actually have some fun questions kind of later
Yeah.
on. So I
Okay.
didn't want to make it so, like, I mean, just kind of, there's a couple of fun things we have here. A couple other questions as well. Your thoughts on defunding the police, Black Lives Matter movement, and there's also in the Asheville City Council, there was a proposal for reparations. That's something that has been uh, on the discourse, as well as throughout the country. I know in California in the legislature, there's been talk about those things. If you could maybe share your feelings or point of view on those issues.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the worst thing that possibly could have happened was this slogan becoming defund the police, because it sounds like then if you are thinking in that direction, that you are about taking money away from the police and or getting rid of police forces entirely, and that is not the case. What we have seen over the last 40 to 50 years is, back when you and I were kids, right? When you think about a policeman, you think about a guy wearing a blue shirt and a badge, and he's wearing black pants, and he's got a pistol on his belt, but that was a policeman, a guy wearing shiny shoes and a blue shirt. And, from Mr. Rogers and Sesame Street and everything else, we learned, find the helpers. If you need help, find somebody who's going to help you. And you compare that image to what we have today, where we very clearly have a situation where police forces are becoming more and more militarized. And there's this perverse correlation where when a police organization has been militarized, there's almost this need to use that militarized force on the population. You also have, what complicates this even further is you have on the civilian side ready access to multiple high-powered firearms, which makes the police even more needful of the type of high-tech body armor and the type of stuff that they're wearing. And so what I would like to see in terms of some reform to law enforcement, I would like to see more funding being allocated to social services that would take some of the pressure of things like homelessness and drug addiction and spousal abuse away from police departments and move them towards social services, where police wouldn't have to think about, what to do with a mentally ill person on the street. They would have a resource that they could call, maybe stay and monitor the situation, but have somebody else take that in hand. And so I think defunding the police is a really terrible phrase. I'm not at all in favor of that terminology, but I wrote a letter to the Mountain Express where I said, look, the people I know that are working in law enforcement are good and decent and honest people, and they do the best job they can, but in a lot of circumstances, they have it really tough. We had a circumstance in Mills River where the owner of the Marathon station called me and he said, hey man, what's up with the sheriff's department? Because I kept calling them because we had a weirdo walking around my gas station with a knife for like 45 minutes. And I said, in Mills River? He said, yeah. He said, finally they came out. So I called Lowell Griffin and I said, let's sit down. We need to talk about this. And as it turns out, Tony, you might not even know this. In Henderson County, there is no animal control department. Guess who handles animal control? If you've got a sick raccoon or something wandering around your yard, guess who has to come deal with it? The sheriff's deputy. So what was happening in Mills River that night was a situation where they had multiple animal control calls and they were dealing with that. They were deep into handling those situations, and they had this other situation pop up at exactly the same time. So it just took them a little bit of time to get to where they could come over and deal with this guy. But police forces are overburdened, and it's really time to start thinking about the choices we've made as a society. Why should the sheriff's department or local city police forces have to deal repeatedly with opioid abuse? Why should they have to deal with the mentally ill? Why should they have to deal with the homeless constantly? That seems like a situation that should be dealt with by social workers and people who are highly trained and able to deal with that.
And then, also it has to do with, with economics. You have people that, at least I know from my own personal, situations that I've seen, people that lose their housing, end up acquiring a substance habit, and things just spiral down, and you have a lot of laws on the books that criminalize poor people, and end up making problems a lot worse.
And I'm not sidestepping that question about Black Lives Matter, because Black lives do matter, and it's time we all admit that. And it's time we all admit that there is a problem with systemic racism in the United States. Things have not gotten better since the 1960s. I'm not so sure that they've gotten better since the 1930s. And, my grandfather was Filipino. I mean from the Philippines. He came here in 1927 on a boat from the Philippines. And I can remember times when we would walk in a hardware store and every eye was on him.
This was in this area?
Yeah, he joined the Army when he came to the United States. Then he was in the CCC, and in the CCC they moved him to this area. So he worked on TVA dams. He helped to work on some of the roads and that sort of thing. They were doing a lot of work in this area with CCC, and so that's how he came to this area. And so he ended up staying here, then going to Florida. He ended his career actually working for NASA. So my grandfather was not your average person. He was a really bright guy. Yeah. And he was a union laborer. He was an electrician, ended up working on that big crawler thing that takes the shuttle and rockets out to the pad. He was really proud of that. We've got some home videos and things like that where he showed some of the things that he had worked on. But you cannot be different And I mean, in terms of your skin color, and not have a different experience as an American than a white person does.
Well, I mean, just the fact that the words Black Lives Matter uh, can bring out some real ugly stuff. I
Yeah.
mean, just those three words alone. Let me ask you, what part of the Philippines was your Lolo from? Where your grandfather from?
He was from, um, the name of the town was Lawag,
L A
Laog,
O L A O A G L A O
Laoag.
A G Laoag.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think in Filipino, if you say where you're from, that's saan ka nagmula. Saan ka
Yes.
nagmula, where you from. And if you want to say it even in a more hip way, saan ka nagmula, fool? Where you from, fool? But I'm not saying that your grandfather was a fool. But
Uh,
people back, I know back in the Bay, they say, hey, where you from, fool? It's just like it's like in endearment. Um,
from the island of Luzon.
Luzon. Okay. I
Yeah.
was actually there up in what they call the Kalinga region. We were there
Oh,
about 2 years
yes.
ago. We did a it was a documentary on my late uncle, poet Al
Mm,
Robles, who he's a major literary figure, and he had never actually been to the Philippines. But if you read his work, you would assume that he was born there. But he was born in San Francisco. We did a
yeah.
documentary. It was called the Al Robles Express, and we went up to Kalinga. We went up to the village of Mabilong, is the name of it, and so we were up there and we shot it. It's uh, it's made the rounds. We've done a couple of film festivals.
Cool.
In fact, October's Filipino American History Month, so they've reissued his book. It was um, it was published by UCLA Press, and they did an updated version, a reprint. So we're going to be doing a tribute to him this year. I'm going to be doing by Zoom a
Mm.
a writing workshop for the folks down in Los Angeles. Shout out to people in Los Angeles. Shout out to people in the Bay, Frisco in the house. What's up? Again, we have Brian Caskey. He is the candidate for Senate District number 48. Before we wrap up, I want to ask you just basically, Chuck Edwards is the incumbent, and you're running against him this November. What are really the fundamental differences between you and Mr. Edwards?
Um,
I mean, I just
everything.
figure I should ask. What's the fundamental? There's a lot of fundamentals.
I'll refer to a piece of literature, as I am sometimes prone to do. There was a book called The Prince of Providence. I don't know if you've ever read that or heard of that. There was a podcast that is based on the book, and the podcast is called Crime Town. So if you're into podcasts like Tony's podcast and you want to pick up a really cool one, listen to Crime Town because it's pretty cool. But in the book, The Prince of Providence, the prince was the mayor of Providence, Rhode Island. And they called him the Prince of Providence because he lived this life of wealth and luxury. And it was because he was very much in bed with the mob. We talked about the Senate being a mafia organization. So
Yeah.
I think it's a pretty appropriate allegory here. But Tony Cianci was the mayor of Providence, and he used to say that there are only two reasons why people get involved in politics, and it's money and power. And I think those two things certainly apply to my opponent. I think that is the reason why he's in politics. I will submit to you that there's a third reason, and that's the desire to do good. And that's why I'm in politics.
And this is Providence, right? You said Providence is
Providence, Rhode Island. Yeah.
And that's the name of the book?
The Prince of Providence.
Okay, the Prince of Providence. Okay.
Yeah. And Buddy Cianci was the mayor. He was totally corrupt. He was in bed. And the Providence Mafia, the Rhode Island Mafia, they were known as, if you wanted a job done sloppily, they were the ones you sent in, not the New York Mafia, not the New Jersey Mafia, not the Boston Mafia. If you wanted somebody and you want to send a message, these were the guys you send, because they were just completely ruthless, completely careless, and yet really tight. So reading that book, I had a lot of, it brought back a lot of similarities to the the North Carolina legislature and the way that they operate.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. One more question that I kind of overlooked here. With COVID, hitting communities of color disproportionately, we have
Yeah.
kind of a large Latino population here.
Yeah.
There has been a lot of concern over 287G. There's been just, the way that immigrants have been treated. You have, children that have been locked up. You have, that horrible story right now about, the hysterectomies that
Oh,
have happened. I mean, just some stuff that is off the chain.
just awful.
What are your feelings on that, and how do you plan to, address those issues? Because I see, there's a lot of Latinos down here that are really just having a hard time of it, since the economy has been so severely impacted by COVID.
Yeah, there are a lot of Latinos in Mills River too,
Yeah.
and farmers here rely on them heavily as a labor force. And I will tell you that our ag committee, which is made up of all the big farmers in Mills River, they advise the town council on matters related to agriculture. And so we had a meeting. It was a council meeting, and there was a letter that they had brought to the council meeting. It was on the agenda, and they wanted us to sign off on it. And it was a letter advocating for the Farm Workforce Modernization Act. And what that bill, which passed the House, but is sitting at the Senate at the federal level, it has not gone anywhere, even though it's passed the House. What that bill would do, and they were arguing in favor of it. They said it would allow us to have a stable workforce and to reward people who are willing to work for us by allowing them a decent path to citizenship. And believe it or not, here in red country, you've got farmers advocating for rights of immigrant laborers, saying, look, these would be better employees. We want to take care of them. They've done a good job for us, and they deserve a viable path to citizenship. And the letter came in front of council, and I said, okay, I need to talk to you guys for a second, because I was paying attention to the news earlier tonight, and I know that it passed the House, and I see that this letter is addressed to Mark Meadows. I said, he voted against this bill. He voted against it. It passed, but he voted against it. So what I would recommend that you do is rework the letter so that you send it to Senators Tillis and Senator Burr. And they said, okay, we will do that. I said, one other thing I would recommend that you do is that you make sure that our mayor signs off on it so that it has the imprimatur of council as well. So it'll carry a little bit of extra weight. And what they said was, we will do all of those things, but we also want to send it to Representative Meadows because we want to shame him. Now, these are farmers who, they're Republicans in every way. They vote Republican every election. There are cracks in that what you would normally see is that Republican stone wall, where people do see that people of color, and especially people who are here and who are following the laws, they deserve a path to citizenship. These are good people, they're good employees, they're good workers, and they're good Americans.
The proposal would have cut the pay. Is that correct, or am I mistaken on that?
I don't believe so. I think what it would have done in a number of ways is it would have removed some of first of all, would have allowed people to become citizens, but it also would have removed, there's like a stipulation, you're here for 2 years and then you have to leave for 2 months. I may have my numbers off a little bit, but there is a stipulation that you have to leave the country for a period of months and then come back and reapply for that visa program. And if you've been terrorized in your home country, let's say you're from Guatemala and the Guatemalan gangs have it out for you. let's say you're homosexual and they know it back where you live and they don't like you for that reason. There are many reasons why people flee and come to the United States. There are many reasons why people want to relocate in the land of opportunity and take advantage of the American dream. And we need to remember who we are as a country and make sure that we're providing access to the American dream to other people.
Yeah, because, what I heard, what's been reported about the detention centers, you might as well just call them prisons, right? With COVID spreading, and
Yeah.
it's just, it's really tragic, and it's very ugly. Brian,
It is.
oh, go ahead, sir.
I was just going to say, it's, a lot of this, unfortunately, these are federal questions, but there are things we can do at the state legislature level to apply a lot more pressure. And so as a state senator, you can count on me to be applying pressure to federal legislators, making sure that these things are coming up. They're not going to listen to a town councilman from Mills River. They're not going to listen to your average person who writes a letter, but they're going to listen to somebody who's in the state Senate.
Brian, I want to thank you. We're going to wrap up in a couple of minutes because I am on Zoom, and I do have the free package, which does not allow me to go beyond an hour, I don't think. But I did have some fun questions towards the end here. I wanted to just kind of transition into that, maybe a little bit more lighthearted. I guess this could be like word association. So your favorite movie thriller?
Favorite movie
like
thriller?
A thriller, like action, Harrison Ford type.
Well, yeah, I have removed all of the Star Wars items from behind me, but
okay.
But I'm a big Star Wars fan. It's huge. My
Okay.
favorite movie of all time is Empire Strikes Back.
Empire Strikes Back. Okay.
Strikes
Back. I just remember, remember Bill Murray used to have that thing on Saturday Night Live when he would sing the Star Wars theme. Remember that? You remember that?
Yeah, I do.
Star Wars, nothing but Star Wars. Okay.
Star Wars. That's right.
Okay. Let's see. The last book that you read.
The last book that I read was Lawrence in Arabia, and it was about T.S. Lawrence, and it goes really deep into the Middle East and the problems that exist there, and how those were not created by T.S. Lawrence, but created by the governments of France and England in order to control the oil supply in the Middle East.
Right. Okay, we're going to transition to music. Your favorite slow jam.
I'm sorry, slow
jam.
Slow jam.
Yeah, if you want to, if you want to get your, slow dance, if you want to get your grind on, what do you put on?
Probably like OMD, like Orchestral Maneuvers in the Dark.
OMD, favorite.
Yeah, I like OMD. What I typically listen to is new wave stuff.
Oh, okay.
And they tend to be on that station quite a bit, but on Spotify, I'm pretty much all Clash all the time. I love the Clash.
Well, what did they have? They had, they had a lot of songs. There was one called Career Opportunities That Never Come.
Yes.
Career Opportunities.
Police and Thieves.
Yeah, it was Joe Strummer. You had the guy with the hat. Yeah, Joe Strummer. Rest in peace. Let's see. I think there may have been one. Oh yeah. Before we do wrap up, since you do identify kind of as a poet, could you just give us one poem off the top of your head? Doesn't have to be a good one. It can be a bad one. It could be a good one, a bad one, or it could be a medium one. But just like a 3-line poem, and it can even be Roses Are Red.
Well, I'll tell you who my favorite poets are. Robert Penn Warren, believe it or not, and he wrote the great American novel, as far as I'm concerned, All the King's Men. He wrote some fantastic poetry that is really underrated. He was one of the fugitive poets in Nashville. And so Robert Penn Warren would be high on my list. Robert Hayden, are you familiar with his work?
Yes, yes.
Yes, I love, those Winter Sundays is one of those all-time classic poems. And I wrote my master's thesis on Kathy Smith Bowers, who was a poet. She was the poet laureate of North Carolina. And so she I'm not sure how long the term is, but she was poet laureate of North Carolina, and she is from the Greenville area. And her parents were both, they didn't even have a high school education. They were both cotton mill workers. And so she has that perspective of coming from a very, very poor upbringing. And I think it's just very unique to Southern poetry. So I love her stuff.
All right. So we have a poet. We have a poet in the house. Brian, again, thank you for being with us on the People's Poet Podcast, Triple P. This is our second inception, or our second episode. For people that want more information about your campaign, more information about you, if they want to volunteer with your campaign, how do they get in contact?
Sure. I have a website. It's briancaskey.com. BrianCaskey.com. And you can donate there. You can click on the volunteer button. You can click to learn more about my platforms and what I stand for. On Saturdays during the month of September, Stacy and I, my wife Stacy, she's running for school board, but we are out at the Henderson Democratic headquarters on Saturday mornings. We're talking to voters and handing out yard signs and all that kind of fun stuff. So come out and see us.
All right. Brian, thank you so much. Much appreciation. Again, People's Poet Podcast. We are doing this regularly. In the month of October, we're going to be celebrating Filipino American History Month. We're going to have Oscar Peñaranda. We are going to also have the wonderful writer, memoir writer, Grace Tolusan, whose memoir, The Body Papers, is an excellent, wonderful, wonderful book. Again, thank you so much for tuning in. And don't forget to hit that button, something called the subscribe button on my channel. It will allow me to send you updates and allow me to keep on keeping on, as they say. So till next time, take care. And that's it from the People's Poet Podcast, Triple P.